What is happening, everybody? It is time for Eric and I's first MLB Live Before Lock show together with us today. So we've had, a couple days in the baseball season so far. He did the show with Spags on Thursday. I did the show with Bellman on Friday. And then today, you and I doing it together. So do us a big favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Eric and I are going to be doing our usual thing, but for baseball here, going through our favorite pitchers, our favorite stacks, favorite hitters. We'll do some dong picks. And the absolute only thing that we absolutely require from you is simply like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Helps keep our content free, and it's only a half second of your time, and it's worth a whole lot to us. So go ahead and do that if you haven't already. We do appreciate it a good amount. Eric, how are you liking the start of the baseball season so far?
So far, so good. Not necessarily from a betting perspective, but I'm always very, very light this time of year, purely because we're accumulating sample size. We just got done with a ton of stud pitchers, and people want to go right to like home run props immediately. And it's like, guys, we have 100,000 days to bet baseball between now and October. We don't need to completely shoot our wad early here. So I'm ready to rock here for today. Finally, Greg, we get some gas cans on the mound. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, and we'll see what ends up happening too. I think there's going to be some narratives surrounding the New York Yankees now because they hit a record number of home runs yesterday, and then it came out afterwards that they have hired apparently a crack engineer to build a better bat for them within the rules. What's really funny about it is then people like, oh, great, what are Judge's numbers going to be this year? Did you see Judge's quote about it?
No.
Not using the new bat, has no interest in using the new bat, didn't use it yesterday. So what is really funny is people like, look, Aaron Judge is going to like hit all these home runs this year. And he was like, no, look at what my numbers were last year. I don't want to change anything. So I don't even know which players on the Yankees were using the bats yesterday, but it became this big, big story. And it's kind of funny that Judge, who scored all of the fantasy points yesterday, 3 homers, had like 8 RBIs or something like that, wasn't even using it.
Wait until he goes into a slump. He will use the bat. Wait until the postseason. He should probably use the bat. That seems like good opportunities for Aaron Judge to change some narratives.
Yeah, there's also there's a call for the bats to be banned online now, which is this going to be like the new tush push or something like that, where people are like, hey, you can't engineer bats that good. Just like you can't draw plays that other teams can't stop. So we'll see. I'm kind of interested if the other thing I'm interested in is this something other teams start doing? Do they start hiring engineers to build better bats? The other part of this too is that this is very much at the forefront because of just small sample sizes. We had one game, we had one game of the Yankees going nuts every day yesterday, and then it was like, oh my God, look, this is the way of the future now. Just all these teams going nuts. We'll see. We'll see what ends up happening with the bats. Is that part of your thought process at all? Because it is something that is, it's a major storyline.
Yeah, it's a major storyline. It probably should be. I mean, think about golf. Like this has existed in golf forever. And then you had to come up with like limitations on how far you can push the boundaries as a club maker to have metal drivers, with titanium, and then it turns into carbon, and then it turns into this and that. It's kind of wild to me that baseball hasn't at least like tried stuff like this before. I thought it was just basically like, here are the bats, here's the construction of it, here's what you're forced to use all the time. I know they have different weights. I know certain guys like to have their bat speed. Like it's like just like golf clubs to some extent. You have senior flex shafts for guys like Luis Arraez, and then you're going to have massive bats for guys like Aaron Judge who just swing it so much faster and want to get more of that pop. But yeah, it's strange to me that this isn't even something that's ever happened in baseball or that's even allowed. So yeah, I would assume other teams would probably be smart to try to figure that out too.
Yeah, so we will see. As far as the weather goes, nothing I'm massively concerned about. There was a request we got the other day is just to make sure we touch on the weather at the top. So yep, nothing that's causing me to take players out of my player pool or avoid games or anything like that. Also, want to make it known that after this show ends, which will be, in an hour as we get up to lock, Eric and I are going to be over in playback. So there's a lot of different things that we could do in playback for baseball. We're going to be watching the games, sweating them out. We could also give out bets on there. If you guys want us to, we could look at some of the other slates, like the afternoon slates, the turbo slates. So anything that you guys want to hear us talk about on the post-lock show while we watch the games together, first, just hop in playback after the show is over. And then also just let us know what it is you're interested in hearing about. Any other general thoughts you have on the slate or anything around it, Eric, before we start to get into the individual hitters, stacks, pitchers, and all that we're liking?
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting to watch the first couple days, and like some guys have a ton of pop. I mean, I'm curious where you think your single entry stack is going to be on today, because like that was the thing you and I would always talk about last year. It's like, where's either the most popular pitcher or what's the most under-owned stack? I think ownership already looks pretty appropriate in some spots. I think there's one spot that's going way, way overlooked. But as I said before, we're getting to the fourth, fifth rotational guys, which I am always more inclined to think like, hey, we're going to get some high scoring slates and it's going to mix and match as injuries show up. But early in the season, it's nice when you get to this gas can era, which is basically just starting today.
Yeah, and I've got an initial version of my lineups built out here. There's certainly going to be some stuff that changes as more lineups come out, like already seeing right here with the Orioles lineup dropping. Not this is like massive or anything like that in terms of my overall exposures, but Jordan Westberg isn't in the lineup today. I did have 10% exposure to him, so there's going to be little things that changes more lineups come out. And yeah, Larry C just brought it up in chat. People are bringing up as well that I'm wearing a robe. Listen, I'll do shows on the weekends, but the odds of me getting dressed for them, it's like 50-50. So that's where we're at. That's where
I was going to say, I thought it was a scarf the whole time, but you're in like a very, very tiny box for me. So I can't, like, let me pull this up. I just assumed it was a scarf.
No,
that is a robe.
Yeah. Yeah. It's comfortable.
Why don't you have the chest hair hang out? Why do you go t-shirt? You gotta let it hang, son.
Because it's cold.
Cool.
I want to be warm. I want to be comfortable. So that's what we got going here. That's what we got going. So
enjoy.
Yeah, I'm very comfortable and I'm ready to talk about some baseball. So let's start here by looking at the pitchers that we have on the slate here, Eric. And like you said, we're not at the top of the rotations anymore. We're now looking at pitchers who are, a little bit further down the pecking order, but the way that the pricing often works on DraftKings and FanDuel is pitchers aren't always priced for necessarily how good they are. They're very often priced relative to the other pitchers on the slate. Now, with that said, though, we still have guys like Aaron Nola, Jacob deGrom on the slate, none of them all that expensive. So I actually want to look at all of the pitchers who are 8,500 and above and group. Actually, let's just do all the pitchers 8K and above because all of them are pulling, with the exception of Chris Bassett, double-digit ownership. So we'll look at the DraftKings pitchers as pay-up options. We'll look at the mid-range, the punt options. They'll move over to FanDuel, which I know you already know this, Eric, just kind of letting people in on how it is that we normally orchestrate these shows if they haven't tuned in this year or forgotten, if they haven't watched from last year, whatever it may be. But high end of pitcher, we've got two really chalk guys. Taj Bradley is 41% owned. Jacob deGrom also just over 40% owned. Do you think these are both warranted pieces of chalk?
Yes. I think especially the Taj Bradley piece, because did you see his pitch count, his last spring training start?
Yeah, he's throwing pretty close to normal pitch, especially when you consider this wasn't a guy who worked crazy deep into games last year. A lot of times we were rostering him last year, we were throwing like 80 to 90 pitches.
That's exactly it. And you hit 100 in spring training, and now we're just like rolling him out against the Colorado Rockies. Like, we have a different stadium that we're still accumulating sample size for. It is 83 degrees there, which definitely worries me a little bit. It's one of the better hitting environments that we have on the board for today. For people who aren't aware, they're not playing in Tropicana, which is just generally a cavern, even though we've seen Tampa Bay have power in previous seasons with, Brandon Lau, Josh Lowe, a number of these guys that have been around for a while now. We have a completely different spot in Steinbrenner Field. So I look at the weather as kind of the main deterrent for me just full out jamming him here. But it's the Colorado Rockies. You get Doyle, Tavar, McMahon, Goodman, Toglia. Like, there's power to some extent at the top of it, but it's one of the weaker top fives you're going to find in baseball. And they strike out a lot top to bottom. They're going to strike out a lot this entire season. Last year, we probably played more pitchers in Coors Field. This is still not Coors Field, Steinbrenner here. So for me, Taj Bradley specifically, like first guy in a cash game setting, probably going to be in my single entry lineup no matter what.
Yeah, and then a related question about the other chalk player here, that is Jacob deGrom. Ryan Steinem says, do we agree with the ownership discrepancy between deGrom with deGrom on a pitch count? So we do have Jacob deGrom projected for over 40% ownership, whereas we have Aaron Nola projected for right around 10% ownership. So it's a pretty big gap here, Eric. You touched on the Taj Bradley piece. I agree. I think he's a good piece of chalk. On the Jacob deGrom side, it's kind of interesting because even though he's on a pitch count, this is a guy who not that long ago was like a $13,000 pitcher. just about every single slate. Now he's dealt with some injuries. I was pretty interested to look up some of his velocity numbers in spring training. I try not to put too much weight into spring training, but we've just seen so little of DeGrom that it was interesting to me to see, like, hey, is he throwing like 92 miles per hour? That would kind of be a tip off that something's wrong. This stuff seems pretty well intact to me. So I think DeGrom also was a warranted piece of chalk, despite some of the concerns about the pitch count, because his price is like 30% less than what it was the last time we saw him healthy.
Yeah, 57 pitches. He pitched 10 days ago. That's kind of the weird part to me. I'm assuming he had a bullpen session in the middle of this at some point, but that's an auspiciously low number. I think he is much more volatile as far as like where he goes in this game. Like, obviously, can Taj Bradley get hit up? Yes. Anytime you get these chalk guys like a Taj Bradley, his xFIP was awesome last year, but very limited sample size, 3.62 xFIP. Had the 4.17 expected ERA. So, I mean, there's some good with some bad. The ground ball numbers are always going to look terrible for Taj Bradley, 42% ground ball rate. He definitely gives up fly ball contact. In fact, 15.1% home run to fly ball ratio from last year. That is on the higher end of the entire slate. That's like next to Robbie Ray and such today. So, like, there's some guys that I think have some risk. Obviously, Taj Bradley is still one of them, and I'm not going to jam him in that game environment. But Jacob deGrom, man, it's a completely different thing when you talk 57 pitches. I can't project him over 75. And I think that's the guy that if you're looking to trim one person who's chalky in the pitcher department, it's very clear cut to me that it's deGrom. And it's not anything to do with his talent, not anything. I mean, we saw 3 starts last year for whatever reason for a Texas team that had nothing to play for. He had pretty good strikeout stuff then at the beginning of September. So, like, I know it's 6 months later, but like, looked decent in the Cactus League, looked decent overall. I have no problem with him if he's somebody you want to get to, but like, does he have 30-point upside? Yeah, he'd have to strike out 12 of 15 probably, but no way I see him pitching into the 6th. I can't really do it at this level of ownership.
Yeah, I've still got myself to a good amount of Jacob deGrom. Maybe that'll end up changing a little bit as we get closer. If projections update, I do have more of Taj Bradley. So between the two of them, I lean more towards Taj Bradley, but I still do like Jacob deGrom. As far as Einstein's question goes with a lower owned pitcher, there is one that I like, but it is not Aaron Nola. So I want to ask you, Eric, who is the pitcher who's pulling less ownership of the 8K plus guys that you like getting to? Because there's only 2 that are really popular in Bradley and deGrom. And outside of them, there actually isn't even another pitcher on the entire slate that's projected for over 20% ownership. So with that in mind, anybody you're rostering that isn't Taj Bradley or Jacob deGrom, they're not all that popular.
Yeah, I think Tanner Bybee's worth a pass. I'm not really getting to anybody in this range, like an exorbitant amount. Most I've got is 11% Bailey Ober, 10% Tanner Bybee, but I'm playing 150. I'm assuming I'll just kind of like get whatever the Sims has me landing on here in the 8K range. But I mean, Bailey Ober, if people aren't aware, I'm wearing a Minnesota Twins hat. I'm not a fan of Minnesota Twins starters when it comes to them being chalky. At least with Bailey Ober today, he's pulling around 12% ownership. I think he's just fine to be landing on. I can't imagine that I want to be like getting over the field in some drastic way to anybody else 8K. I just think the 7K range, whether it's Andrew Heaney, like there's just some guys there that I like a little bit more. Robbie Ray's pulling the most ownership, probably appropriate, but I brought it up before. You're in Great American Small Park, and his home run to fly ball numbers are concerning. And so you go from one of the more pitcher-friendly environments there in San Francisco where he pitched, last season. I think he's still somebody to be considering, but right now I've got 8% of him purely because I like the Cincinnati side a little bit more.
I like both sides of it.
Yeah.
So when it comes to Robbie Ray, if he struggles, it's generally walks and homers. Very, very favorable for DFS. When he pitches well, his kind of only way to generate outs for a while has been strikeouts. When he gives up contact, it generally tends to be hard contact. So I like both sides of playing Robbie Ray because if he's getting outs, it's probably going to be a big fantasy game with a lot of upside. If he's giving up contact, it's probably going to be home runs. So I think one side of this game, whether it's Robbie Ray or whether it's the Reds offense, somebody's putting up a big fantasy game. I do want to be getting exposure to both sides of it. So if I'm looking for a lower owned pay up option, I think Robbie Ray offers the most upside. Now, we did just get an update on Jacob deGrom.
How about your boy? How about your boy over
here? Baseball, apparently, as well. carries over to baseball. We talk about something that comes up. So we got from Jacob deGrom, he's going to be throwing about 75 pitches today. Now, this said about, so I assume like if he's through like 4 2/3 innings at 72 pitches, I think they probably give him that final batter. But more or less what this means to me is we're probably getting 5 innings out of Jacob deGrom. Is that how you're seeing it?
I had him for 75 pitches. I feel very, very special today. Thank you, Doug Dubs, for the shout out in chat there too. I just didn't see a world where I could take him above that number. I put him strictly at 75, and it just got me to lower Jacob deGrom. We're going to have to take him down a little bit. I'm assuming it won't get drastic. He's not going to go underneath like 16 fantasy points or anything. He's still viable. But what I expect is the ownership comes down just because 80, 85 off the table entirely. Like, I know you're saying that he could get extended, like if it's close or anything else, but I think with a guy like Jacob deGrom, you're far more likely to trim it to the lower side of 75 than you are to the higher side of 75 with all the injury risk, with all the money invested, with the talent that you know is there. Texas, they need him to be Jacob deGrom this season. There's really no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Yeah, so I'll be really interested to see what ends up happening. I actually don't think it's going to impact our projection. That's probably about where we had him looking as far as a projected pitch count. Because I mean, keep in mind too, a guy who, you know, like on the high end, what were you possibly been expecting from like 80 to 85 pitches? None of us were expecting 100 pitches. And, you know, even 80 to 90 pitches out of Jacob deGrom, which is what we would often get out of him in the past, it'd still be somebody who averaged like 25 fantasy points. So we're getting close to we're getting like 80% of the full workload from deGrom.
Yeah, and he's still the best pitcher in baseball when healthy. We have seen that routinely. He was breaking the algorithm 2 years ago with the Mets, 3 years ago with the Mets. I mean, the guy was out of control good. And if it weren't for injuries, I think Jacob deGrom would be like the face of pitching in baseball, would still be there. It's kind of sad because, you know, obviously he has that kind of talent in him. Injuries are a part of sports. It sucks. But like when it comes to DFS, I do think we're going to have to trim it down a tiny bit purely because the win has to like almost entirely off the table. Not entirely. It's still Jacob deGrom. They could be up. You can get through 5 in 75 pitches. Like I suppose that it's still there, but I think the way that you go about projecting it would have to come down. I'm just going to take a fantasy point off and let it run in the Sims. I think that's probably the easiest way to do it for right now, unless we get some kind of an adjustment. But as I said before, 45%, I doubt with that news and everything getting updated across the industry that we're going to see 45% Jacob deGrom today, or that's just a mistake by the field.
We did just update his projection, by the way, and it has gone from, I'll just update it on the screen right here. So we've got him going from 17.3 fantasy points to 16.8 now. And the ownership, that'll probably be updated in short order as well. So we'll see what ends up happening with the ownership. Like you said, I don't think he maintains 40% ownership. I think it'll come down a little bit. He is still the second highest projected pitcher overall on the slate. The other thing that I think is kind of interesting, considering some of this news about deGrom, Taj Bradley's a really easy cash game option, Eric. We're clicking on him.
Yes.
Jacob deGrom is still projected for a lot of ownership, even though you and I are expecting that to come down. Is he the guy who should be the second starting pitcher after Taj Bradley in cash games for DraftKings? FanDuel's easy. You just click on Taj Bradley. For DraftKings, who do you pair with Bradley in cash?
God, I'm torn. I almost don't want to say my answer out loud because it's embarrassing. Like, I think it's actually outwardly embarrassing. But, like, if you're looking on the cheap end of pitcher and you just kind of actually, you know what? I'm not going to even entertain it. I'm not going to say it out loud. I think the most obvious guy that I would want to play is Robbie Ray, even in cash because of the strikeout upside. I think he'll be pulling the next most ownership. I know it's freaky in Cincy and I'm going to have a lot of them in tournaments, but I still think it's probably Robbie Ray just because of his K prop.
It's going to be deGrom for me. There's so much blowout risk with Robbie Ray, or blow up risk.
Yeah,
I'd rather take the safer points from deGrom.
That's fair. That's totally fair. I guess I was just trying to think of like the path onto something different. And there's one pitcher on the cheap end that is just he has like no strikeout upside, so it is what it is. But yeah, I look at probably Taj Bradley. I'm not playing cash, as you could probably tell with that answer, but Jacob deGrom, you usually just want to take the two guys that are pulling by far the most ownership. over any long sample size, which is what MLB is. Like you're not playing it just to win today. You're playing it to win over the course of an entire MLB season. If you're playing cash games every day, I got to think you just want to take like top 2 almost all the time.
Let's talk about the next price range of pitcher where we don't have anybody that's really all that popular at the position, at least in our projections right now, outside of Taj Bradley and Jacob deGrom. So if we're looking at the pitchers who are in the 7K range now, Eric, where a lot of pitchers in the 7K range, the only one who's getting any kind of attention from the field is Michael Wacha, who's 12% owned. Then you got Marcus Stroman at 3%, Andrew Heaney 5%. We got Sagano, who is sub 1%, Parker 3%, Savali 4%, Feltner 4%. We got Dick Fitz at 1% ownership. Really happy to see he's back in the mix this year for the Boston Red Sox. So like we could shout out his name here. Anybody that you are liking in the 7K range, Michael Wacha, I guess he's the popular choice, but not really because he's still only 12% owned. So do you like him or any of the contrarian 7K pitchers?
Yeah, I think the one guy that if we were to just say, who do you think could potentially outperform last year's strikeout numbers? Like, I think Andrew Heaney is very clearly your answer. The guy had unbelievable strikeout stuff with the Dodgers back once upon a time. Like just sub 23% last year, 22.9%. Has some of that blowout risk or blow up risk, if you will, that we were just talking about with Robbie Ray as well, another southpaw. But overall goes about it 4.04 at FIP, decent enough, 4.18 xFIP, not ideal, but like I think you look at Andrew Heaney as a guy that if you were just looking at one start, one opportunity to seize everything you ever wanted, like Andrew Heaney is definitely the guy that I think has the best strikeout stuff amongst the entire range. And he gets just an awesome spot. He's in Miami. Max Meyer on the other side, high probability of, potentially coming in with a win there. I mean, Pittsburgh Pirates lineup is not ideal today here either, but a lot of lefties there. Frazier, Sawinski, you get some guys that, Brian Reynolds, switch hitter, professional hitter, Jack Sawinski going up against Meyer. And Meyer is so bad with a 13.9% barrel percentage and yet another like contrarian stack, I think is standing out to me. But like, I think Andrew Heaney, despite like a 433 expected slugging, despite the fly ball contact, I think every single time you look at the Miami Marlins lineup, you should try to like withhold the vomit. Like it's such a targetable lineup and will be the entire season. I mean, 1.5, like I would say like Jonah Bride, probably long-term out of the, like Otto Lopez can run, Xavier Edwards can run, but like, what is this lineup every single day? So I think you just kind of target the lineup there of Miami with a guy who has a great strikeout arm, Andrew Heaney, and kind of move on in the range.
Yeah, Andrew Heaney's somebody who I've liked quite a bit as a contrarian option. I think almost every slate that he pitched on last year where he was like sub 10% owned, I was probably overweight to the field on him last year. I agree with you. I think he looks relatively decent as well today, $7,500. You mentioned the park upgrade, only 5% owned. And then also just by comparison, it's like, who the hell else is there to like in this price range? Like, I guess like Mitchell Parker, relative to the talent of the other guys, maybe he's not all that bad, but the matchup is terrible against the Phillies. So by process of elimination, I land on Andrew Heaney's being the guy as well. Like Michael Wacha, I think he's all right, but I don't necessarily love his matchup either compared to some of these other guys. You've got a Cleveland team that historically, they have a bunch of players that just don't strike out in their lineup. So it's like Michael Wacha, could he put up a start where maybe he goes like 5-6 innings, has, 2, 3, 4 strikeouts and limit some of the damage? Sure. I'm just not exactly sure what his upside is. I think Andrew Heaney brings more upside to the table. He's also got half the amount of ownership. So we see this the exact same way. Anybody are taking a punt on in the 6K range? Because we do have, 5 guys there. Palante, Max Meyer, Davis Martin, Nick Martinez, Jack Kokonowitz, who, by the way, beat out Reed Detmers for the final spot in the Angels rotation. The Angels, for whatever reason, they just don't seem to like Reed Detmers, who he might be the best pitcher they have on their roster. But going back to last year, same. He was pitching pretty well, has a couple of bad starts. They sent him to the minor leagues, and they just haven't been consistent with how they like to use Reed Detmers. So he did not make the rotation this year. Kokonowitz did. Any of these 6K range guys, you like, all of them are sub 5% owned.
Yeah, so when I was talking about completely punting and not giving a shit, Jack Kokonowitz is the guy. Like, I don't think he has any strikeout upside whatsoever. Like, he has no strikeout pitch, but he induces ground balls. He does a decent enough job of just kind of going about his business, and it's the White Sox. So same thing I'm talking about with Andrew Heaney. I think it's interesting to just kind of find some of these pitchers that maybe don't even necessarily have a ton of arm talent. But, Reed Detmers has arm talent. One day he will pitch for a team that is not the Los Angeles Angels, and he is going to bulldoze them. He's going to go up against the Angels, and it will be a revenge narrative. He will try to strike out everybody. And you know what? Because it's the Angels, he'll probably do it. So Reed Detmers, I don't know why he can't get a spot here. He's the most talented pitcher by far that they got. But such is life. Kakano, it's 6,500. You're just punting. Looking at the White Sox lineup and some of these projected Ks, like it doesn't look nearly as good today with Nick Maton at the top of it, Matt Tyson in the middle of it, lefty. But he does a good enough job with the sinker of just inducing those ground balls that I think he's a viable option on today's slate all the way at the bottom. And then Davis Martin on the other side of it. Everything I just said, you could just copy paste about what I'm talking about targeting the Angels. I am well over the field on Davis Martin, and boy, oh boy, does it not feel good. But there are times it's shown out in strikeout stuff, not really at the end of last year, but I think the White Sox had already kind of packed it in. They kind of left him out to dry. I felt bad for some of those guys that were getting rolled out by the White Sox every single day, but I think we could find some upside there this season, this time around. Looked okay in spring. Yeah, I can roll out a little Davis Martin as well.
There's a point in time where I used to take chances on Max Meyer. I'll often do that with low-owned, cheap starting pitchers that were former top prospects, but he's just never been able to figure it out in the big leagues. And it's not even that. I mean, he's made 13 starts, so we're not looking at the biggest sample size in the world, but he's dealt with injuries. He missed all of 2023. Then you look at last year, 5.68 ERA, 4.74 expected ERA. The thing that I had that is the biggest concern about Max Meyer is that when he was a top prospect and coming up through the minor leagues, he had outstanding strikeout stuff at every level that he had pitched at. And that's just not the case when he's reached the big league level. So I get concerned like what his actual ability to generate swing and misses are. And then also you factor in some of the injuries and the limited amount of time that he's been able to work. I think it's just stunted his development. He's 26 years old now. So you got a guy who, I reach a point where I just kind of start to give up on what the upside of somebody is. And when they get to be 26 years old and they just haven't found any real success, then it's less so that I'm willing to bet on the upside. He's probably just a guy at this point. So my gut reaction is Max Meyer, but I'm not really getting to him in lineups, nor am I getting to anybody else in the 6K range.
I had one guy I wanted to ask you about because this is kind of like to the game theory aspect of it. And also I can make a case for the strikeout stuff to some extent, but is Mitchell Parker somebody that you're going to play any of?
Let's see. My last run, I had him in 2% a lineup. So it depends what you mean any. Like, will it be 0%? No, it will not be a substantial amount of lineups, though.
Okay. I at least want to preface it with this. I do think if you look at the weather today and you look at the game environments, it is blowing 15 to 20 dead center in Washington today. It is the top stack, and I don't think it's remotely close. If you had one stack and you said, hey, Eric, I need to win today, or I need to pick the team that scores the most runs today, I would pick the Phillies. I don't think anybody would argue that. But on the other side of it, Mitchell Parker's a guy who didn't get a ton of leash last year. He had 17 decisions, 29 starts overall, 151 innings pitched. But you will go through like AAA. It's the same kind of thing with Max Meyer, where at least his numbers are just ridiculous at some of the AAA stuff. 2023, 34% K rate, only had one start last year, so those numbers don't even really count from AAA. He was primarily with the big league club the whole way around. He had spikes, he had upside, and it is a Phillies team that if they're going to be mega chalk in some of these spots, which I think they will be because they have so much power, there are a lot of strikeouts to be had too. There are ways that you can go about this lineup, and you take out Trey Turner today and you put X player in, it's going to be weaker with Edmundo Sosa that's going to be out there in the back half of the lineup. Johan Rojas, probably the guy who's getting the start technically over Trey Turner. But I look at Schwarber, Bohm, Harper, Castellanos, Stott. Like, we're talking some really, really, really good power bats. There's a lot of strikeouts, and Schwarber specifically coming around there 2-3 times. Left on left, I think that there's at least a case to be made for trying to take some shots in tournaments, but currently getting 4%, so I'm kind of in the same boat as you. But just from a game theory aspect, going up against a team that could end up being an even more popular stack than projected, I at least want to contemplate it.
Anything else you want to add about the pitchers on the DraftKings side? And by the way, Jorge, I see your super chat. We'll answer that in a second when we get to the offenses here. Anything else you want to talk about as far as DraftKings pitchers go? If not, we'll look at the FanDuel pitchers.
Yeah, I think because of how it's not the quality, the not quality of these pitchers today, you can kind of mix and match and get some random 2, 3, 4% of some of these guys and hope that it clicks. Like I'm doing that with a number of them. I'm a little surprised I'm not getting to Aaron Nola, considering I don't think I have no problem with Aaron Nola whatsoever against Washington. I just think the game environment breeds me to getting to Washington on the other side. I just don't think that they're popular enough on today's slate. So that's kind of why I'm probably not getting to Nola, but don't really have anything else here on the DK side for now.
All right, so let's go ahead and look over on FanDuel where Taj Bradley, he's pretty clearly a cash game pitcher. If you're playing cash games, I don't even think this requires a second of thought. You're just playing Taj Bradley in FanDuel cash. Then you also got Jacob deGrom, 18% owned. Nobody else is pulling double-digit ownership. So I think where we start here, Eric, is by looking at Taj Bradley, Jacob deGrom, and kind of try to justify what their ownerships are, and then try to find any sort of contrarian option. For me on FanDuel, Jacob deGrom, nowhere near as interesting as he is on DraftKings, just because things like the quality start, the win bonus are so important on FanDuel. And if we assume that he's going to be capped at about 5 innings, potentially even less if he's inefficient in the early goings, it's really hard for me to want to click on him on FanDuel as the second most popular pitcher. Taj Bradley, on the other hand, I think the ownership is warranted in GPPs.
Yep, 100% think it's warranted. Taj Bradley is your go-to guy. I think he should even be more popular, maybe, depending on what entry level. If you're playing the main, he'll probably come in right around that because you're only playing one pitcher on FanDuel. People still want to take shots other places, and I totally get it. But I do think the rake is Jacob deGrom. It's not surprising to you. Went from like 24% before the show to right around 17. And I think that's only going to come down. I don't think people are stupid when it comes to, trying to make a case for why you shouldn't play Jacob deGrom on FanDuel and why it's probably okay to get to him on DK. You said it. It's the win bonus. It's the quality start bonus. Like you have to get those with some of these top tier pitchers. Too many pitchers on the slate today to not take that shot. But considering Taj Bradley is stretched out, 3.5 implied run total on the other side that we're projecting, the ownership is still not high enough for how good of a strikeout artist Taj Bradley is, and the matchup and everything is just kind of firing up for him there. Robbie Ray definitely, I think, is probably my second favorite that exists over there for sure, which is terrifying to say out loud for sure. But I look at some of these punts, not nearly as interesting on FanDuel. I would just be eating mega chalk with Taj Bradley today.
That's how I feel as well. You and I are pretty aligned on a lot today, although on DraftKings, I like deGrom a little bit more than you. But outside of that, as far as FanDuel goes, I agree. Don't really like him all that much. I want to be eating the chalk with Taj Bradley in GPPs as well. It's hard to find a pitcher who's even remotely comparable to him. If I am going to be going off the board and go to anybody else on FanDuel, it's instantly going to be somebody who's contrarian just by default because nobody else is pulling any kind of ownership. I do agree with you that there's nobody crazy as a punt that I want to be going with. We're looking like super cheap. But Andrew Heaney is $8,100 on FanDuel, that matchup against Miami. And it's pretty realistic to think he could get through 5 innings, get himself the win bonus, maybe even gets through 6, gets himself this quality start bonus when you consider the matchup there against Miami. So if I want to be taking somebody lower owned than Taj Bradley or Jacob deGrom, I go back to the same guy we liked on DraftKings, 2% ownership on Andrew Heaney. I think there's a much better than a 2% chance of him being in a winning lineup today.
Correct. Also, Tomoyuki Sagano, I don't think he's going to have any strikeout stuff. He's 35 and he's a quality pitcher. Maybe this is the spot where you could say, hey, I don't know what their pitch, what their plan is going to be with him going forward. He's 8,300 already on FanDuel. I've just kind of stared at him all day on what I wanted to do. If I wanted to play any, I'm not going to play any on DK. I think it's kind of foolish. I don't find him to be all that interesting. FanDuel, these are the kind of guys that can just come out and have a workload. I know despite what we've seen from the Dodgers and their handling of their guys from Japan that, you'd think abbreviated start. No, this guy's going to be able to eat up innings and they're going to need him to for Baltimore. Try to do as much of that as possible and flip it over. He had really good numbers, like sub 2 ERA sub 1 whip over in Japan, like good stuff overall. But like, I find him to be probably somebody that if I were to play him, I would play him on FanDuel, but I'm not going to. Just wanted to at least bring him up because I had some DMs about him this morning, which is not how I anticipated my morning going.
Any final thoughts you have on pitcher at all?
No.
All right, so we're going to head on over to stacks and offense now. But first, want to let you guys know that if you do sign up for any package here at Stokastic for the baseball season, sign up with the promo code CYCLE, because for just $1, you're going to get access to whatever package you choose all the way through April 3rd. So that is what is April 3rd? Next Friday or something?
Yep.
So April 3rd, you get access for just $1, and then that package is going to renew on April 4th. So take advantage of this offer. We're not going to be having dollar deals around here very frequently, maybe even at all for the rest of the season. So if you just want to try out what we have, our player projections, ownership projections, top stacks tool, top pitchers tool, and then things like our post-contest sims. We've got our single lineup simulator. You could hand build individual lineups and simulate them. Get access to everything for just $1 with the promo code CYCLE, all capital letters. And once again, this is going to run through April 3rd. So it doesn't matter if you sign up yesterday, today, tomorrow, you're going to get access for $1 through April 3rd. So take advantage of that and take advantage of it sooner rather than later, because it's more advantageous for you. Let's talk about offenses now, Eric. And let's start by answering the super chat that we have from Jorge. Jorge says he needs help deciding whether to play a Texas, I assume he means a Rangers mini stack with the Phillies, or Judge plus 2 Tampa Bay bats. Thoughts? All right, so these are the options here, Eric. Okay. Rangers mini stack with Phillies, or Judge and 2 Tampa Bay players. I feel like there's a little bit of context missing here. Are you making a full stack anywhere, Jorge? Because you should be making some sort of full stack somewhere. Yes. But what's your preference? The Rangers, the Phillies, Tampa Bay, Aaron Judge, where are your allegiances at offense overall based on what Jorge had asked us?
Yeah, Tampa Bay and Judge, it would probably be. It's not as good of a game environment for the Yankees today as what it was, over the last 3 days. Winds blowing in, a little bit cooler up in the Northeast, like not as ideal, but the Tampa Bay side is at least interesting to me. I've been a Ryan Feltner stan at times, which is not a good thing to be a stan for. I am going to be going against that here to some extent today. I do have more Tampa Bay interest with the game environment, just different stadium. And as we accumulate, I do think it's going to be one of the more hitter-friendly ballparks that we have in baseball. It's already 80-plus degrees there, which never hurts this time of year to get those kind of game environments, as opposed to some of these that are 40s, 50s pulling more ownership. So I'll go Tampa and Judge, but neither one are going to be like prominent parts of my lineups today, neither side.
I'll say this, single entry, I have zero interest in Aaron Judge. He's clearly the top hitter from like a projection standpoint, but his odds of homering today relative to what his ownership is going to be, he's going to be so popular today. And the Yankees probably are as a whole in a way that we can't even measure with data. Like I see we have them projected for 6.5% ownership. I'm taking the over on that. I know they're expensive, Eric, but I think there's this narrative about the new bats they're using. They scored all these runs yesterday. I think they're going to be like 1.5x what their projected ownership is. Totally
100% agree with you.
Yeah, so I'm going to go with the other side, Jorge, just because, if we're talking about one lineup, my preference is to be underweight to the Yankees. Obviously scary after what they did yesterday, but I just think this team is going to end up being more popular than what they otherwise should end up being on the slate. Let's see. Was there any other questions from Discord? If not, which there aren't, let's talk. Oh, no, there are. They just didn't load for a second. We've got one here from 28. He wants to know, what about Wacha with no Jose for Cleveland? When we talked about guys in the 7K range, I brought up Wacha as the guy who's most popular there. He's just a guy to me. Like, I'm right around in line with the field. I have a little bit more than 10% of him as well. I have no real strong lean for or against Wacha at his ownership. I just think he's appropriately owned.
Agreed.
And then also updated sims and my lineups for some of the new lineups we had out, as well as for our projection coming down just a little bit on Jacob deGrom. Here's what ended up happening. I have Taj Bradley in over 80% of my lineups now, Eric. I'm just going to be married to Taj Bradley, playing some of Jacob deGrom, although about even with the field on him. And then I've got some guys that I like for cheap that we talked about before, like Andrew Heaney, for instance. But my real big stand of pitcher is just playing a ton of Taj Bradley. So as far as Don't Be Soy's question, or sorry, 28's question about Waka, yeah, certainly more favorable for him with Jose Ramirez not being in the lineup, but I'm not dying to play like 30% of Waka or anything like that.
Nope, I'm playing 72% Taj Bradley right now. I'm going to update stuff too, because we just got an update like a minute or 2 minutes ago here now. So I'm going to rerun it one more time. I saved this sheet and I'll kind of figure out what I want to do. But getting to 3% Rockies as well. So 1% over the field, 1.5x, Greg, the ownership of the Rockies as well. But that's something I typically do when I'm jamming a pitcher on one side.
If you're only building one stack today in a single entry, and by the way, I actually don't think this is a great single entry slate, because what I really like to do with single entry is try to identify some leverage spots, which I just don't really think exist today. There's only two pitchers that are pulling ownership. It's Jacob deGrom, and even though I don't want to stack against deGrom, and then I don't want to stack against Taj Bradley either. So with that in mind, I don't see like a great leverage spot for single entry, but is there one lineup or one stack that you are liking above the other teams that you would maybe want to identify as your single entry stack for the day?
Yep. It is the Washington Nationals. I think Aaron Nola is really good. Aaron Nola is very, very good. There are 15, 20 mile an hour winds blowing straight out to center field. It is going to play a little bit like it could play like a bandbox. And we don't really know entirely when you get game environments like this exactly how it's going to project out. But what I do know is Washington is pulling absolutely no ownership, and Philly is pulling all of it on the other side here. So there's a couple of things that work for you. One, you're kind of getting exposure to the game environment that, obviously I'm playing some Phillies and they're the most popular stack, but if I'm going to be playing them as like 2 and 3 mans too, I like getting Washington there, because if you get double dong from Kyle Schwarber, from Bryce Harper, I like to think that the game environment itself probably did some help and probably buoyed the entire spot. It's something I like to do, especially early on in the season. I talked with Alex Baker when I first started here like 4 or 5 years ago, and he's just like, yeah, there's certain spots early in the season. I'll play more San Diego. I'll play more teams that are in warm environments, which totally makes sense. But this is one where I just kind of see Aaron Nola, who is still a really, really good pitcher, but has a lot of mileage on the tires. We don't know exactly where he's at here early in the season. A lot of elite pitchers still take some time getting it ramped up. He looked okay last year, looked pretty darn good. He's got the knuckle curve still. It's probably going to throw fits to some of the young guys, but they buried Dylan Cruz to the 8-hole today. I like the construction of it here with Luis Garcia in the 3-hole. Overall, I'm just kind of looking at Washington as one of those teams that, hey, if I'm going to be playing 2 and 3 man Phillies here as well, just give me the stack on the other side too, and hope that it's a 12-8 ball game because of the wind.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with that. So for myself, there's a team that I keep landing on to open up the season here, Eric, and it is the San Francisco Giants, who get this great park upgrade going and playing in Cincinnati. I had a very tilting outcome on the first day of the season where I meant to play the Giants in single entry, but fucked up my CSV. And then just ended up with a dummy in single entry, a dummy lineup. Now, with that said, that dummy lineup was cashing until the end of the slate where it got passed by San Francisco Giants stacks. So I am going back to the Giants. I just really like the park situation for them being in Cincinnati, going up against a pitcher, Nick Martinez, as well, who pitches to a lot of contact. That just does not situate very well for a guy who's going to be pitching in Cincinnati. So Nick Martinez is a guy who I think, if I remember correctly, there was a bunch of times that you and I had stacked against him last year, as well as rostered him at times as well. He's a guy who pitched overseas. He initially was in the big leagues, struggled at the major league level. There was no job for him, goes and pitches in Japan, finds some success there, comes back to the big leagues, and he's been way more successful, and his numbers on the surface really good last year. 3.1 ERA, 3.19 expected ERA, 3.5 wins above replacement. It's like a solid middle of the rotation sort of pitcher, but there was still the issue of he pitches to a lot of contact. And at some point, I think that's going to burn him pitching here in Cincinnati. He only had a 20.4% strikeout rate last year. Also a guy who very low ground ball rate. Just all these things are subject to a lot of upside against him. 36.9% ground ball rate. And then you combine that too with the amount of contact he pitched to. I like going to the Giants today. It's the team that if I was just building one lineup, it would be the Giants. And it's actually the team I have the most exposure to in large field tournaments as well.
Yeah, I love the Giants as well. Again, it sounds redundant because it's like, oh, do you like everything? No, there's certain spots that I just think are definitely underrepresented. One of my highest owned batters, Jung-Hoo Lee. So that's going to be fun. We'll experiment with that one together. But we know Lamont Wade. We know Heliot Ramos is a guy with just massive power. And if he didn't play in San Francisco, the guy would be a 40 home run candidate, 45 home run candidate. He is that kind of pop in the bat. You get Flores in the 6 hole, Matos 7 hole. Huff isn't like the best catcher on planet Earth. He was basically like the 3rd or 4th catcher on Texas's roster the last 2 years. He's whatever. I don't love it, but he's 2,200 at least. And, obviously you need to get some exposure across the board with it. And Fitzgerald in the 9 hole has basically nothing for me, but I look at 1 through 7 here for San Francisco. Very, very lethal.
And we have all the lineups in now and projections are updated. So I am going to be running one final sim here, which I don't think anything's going to change too much. Just want to make sure I have all the correct lineups in with everything because, don't want to play guys who are not going to end up playing. Don't Be Soy left us a question. He says he's running a little bit behind. Are there any serious weather concerns anywhere today? No. Eric talked about some of the wind in Washington, but if you're talking about is the game going to be rained out? There's nothing that I see that's troublesome for me on the main slate, Eric.
Nope, none at all.
And I think I saw that come up in the YouTube chat as well from Arkathelza. I did see we also have a power chat and no question attached to it. This is just Dan. Dan 06712 said, thanks to the great Stokastic tools and content, I solo shipped the MLB main slate minimax yesterday. Thanks, guys. So yeah, shout out to Dan. And if you guys also want to try out the tools, just $1 with that promo code cycle, CY. Here, I'll pull it up on screen here so you guys can see it. I just realized that if I spell it out for people, it'll be much easier if they just see it. So CYCLE, that's all capital letters. It is cap sensitive. So enter that promo code, get access for just $1. And also our portfolio EV tools. If you guys want to try those out and place some bets with us this year, that is also a 7-day free trial. This is zero cost at all. If you want to sign up for the portfolio EV tools, which Eric and I might be looking for some bets over in playback in a little bit here as well. Slate locking in 12 minutes. Eric, as far as the really popular stacks go, which there isn't anything crazy popular. We've got Toronto 8% owned, Philly 8% owned, the Angels 10% owned. Are there any teams you're viewing as over-owned, though?
Yeah, I said it looked pretty appropriate. Like, ownership looked pretty darn appropriate. I do think Toronto's a little high. Like, again, talking about Sagano, this was the main reason that I kind of dove into it is we have the Lindy DFS chat, and there's usually 1 or 2 people. We've more so been going back and forth in DMs than in the channel itself over in the Lindy and Friends Discord. Which Greg is in as well, by the way. People are looking for some futures bets. Get that on the table right now. Would love to have you guys in there hanging out. But we've got Tomoyuki Sagano, and he had really good numbers. And I think Japan, if you were to like KBO is whatever. They were the first back from COVID, so they always have a special place in my heart. But second best baseball league in the world, Greg. Got to be Japan now, right?
I couldn't tell you that I'm super familiar with all of the secondary and tertiary baseball leagues, but I will take. I'm partial to the KBO because I've watched it before, but I couldn't tell you what's like the second best.
Yeah, I would think it would be Japan at this point, and there were at least some metrics that the guy did such a good job at just limiting damage over there. And I'm not saying that it's going to continue or carry over. We don't know what to make of it. It'll be a first start. I'm sure 5 starts from now, we'll have more concrete ideas about who this guy is when he's facing the best hitters in the entire world. But are the best hitters in the entire world all on the Toronto Blue Jays? I do not believe that. So I think that they're a little bit overowned, but I don't have a problem if people want to embrace it. It's one of those like classic, like if Toronto was they were middle of the pack, I'd have a lot more interest in them, but they're the second or third most popular stack that we're looking at on the slate. That's probably where they're going to end up landing. I think that's a little aggressive for me, just based on the track record for him. And then the track record of some of these other pitchers that we just have a far better idea of where they land. So I would not like to embrace the volatility of this spot, considering the popularity that they have. I think the Angels are fine against Davis Martin. I think the Yankees, coming off of a billion runs, are just fine. Minnesota maybe a little bit overowned against Andre Palante. The guy gets so many ground balls. Like, he is pitching to contact as well, but Andre Palante is like negative launch angle guy extraordinaire. I don't love when they're pulling, like when people are pulling ownership up against him either, but it makes sense. You find the gap, you can move the line. Andre Palante is not quote unquote good, and he has no strikeout upside. So I definitely feel as though outside of those spots that I kind of hit on there, everything looks pretty appropriate.
The Angels are really the Angels being the most popular team on the slate at 10% owned. And like I like some of the hitters as one-offs. I've got about 5% of them as 5-man stack. So it's not like an outright fade. I'm just underweight to the field on them. The biggest issue that I have with the Angels is they suck. Like, if I'm like, I like Mike Trout as a one-off, but do I want to be making 5-man stacks of the most popular team on the slate when it's objectively one of the worst offense in baseball? Like, I'd rather just play Trout as a one-off.
Totally get it. And Taylor Ward too. Taylor Ward, pretty much everyday ending, and why I think he's very, very good. Do we even have that lineup, by the way?
We have all the lineups now.
Where did they go? They're not in my sheet. So I did not get the Angels lineup for some reason.
Let's see.
Can you read it off for me? Because I don't have it in my sheet at all.
Yeah, I'm scrolling through all the lineups that News God had posted in Discord. I know we got the message from, oh, here it is. Taylor Ward, Nolan Shanuel, Mike Trout, Jorge Soler, Yoan Moncada, Travis d'Arnaud, Luis Rengifo, Tim Anderson, and then Kyron Paris. They've really every year accumulate all of these guys who are like 5 years past prime. That's like the offseason every year of the Los Angeles Angels. Like this year, they bring in Yoan Moncada, they bring in Travis d'Arnaud, they bring in Tim Anderson. How about they try to get guys who are good now, not guys who used to be good? It might be a better strategy for them. Why not try that?
Well, I like Soler. I think Soler will be okay. I mean, he's not previous season Soler. He's not World Series MVP for the Braves, Jorge Soler, but he's freaking good still.
Yeah. I mean, in general, though, you look at all the additions they made in the offseason, and it's almost all guys who are past prime. And even Jorge Soler, he's been good. Just the fact the Angels like him makes me think he's probably not going to be good this year.
That's incredible. You're so biased against them doing anything correct. So I appreciate that about you.
Yeah. EMAC bringing it up in chat. Some of their big recent free agent acquisitions or the massive contracts they've doled out in free agency. Albert Pujols, Josh Hamilton, Anthony Rendon. Yeah. They very, very infrequently have made splashes in free agency that have gone well. They're terrible at identifying the guys they want to sign and use their money on. So I mentioned I like the San Francisco Giants the most overall as a stack. Not alone in that is I really like the Reds on the other side. I brought that up when we were talking about pitchers. The two offense I have the most exposure to. It's in the same game. It's San Francisco number 1, the Reds number 2. Neither of them are overly popular. 6% ownership going to the Giants is a stack. Just under 6% ownership to the Reds is a stack. It's a matchup against Robbie Ray. If he's generating swing and misses, he's probably scoring 20+ fantasy points and is going to be one of the players who is at least in consideration for a top pitcher on this slate. But if he's hitting the plate and he is not working on the edges and not generating those swing and misses, I think the Reds are very live to put up a crooked number and a lot of home runs. So Giants, Reds, neither of them overly popular. Those are my two most rostered offenses, Eric.
Absolutely love it. Yeah, those are the two that you really want to be overweight to looking at our data. It makes all the sense in all the world. Again, you don't get these illustrious game environments that show up here everywhere. One of them that is better than most has Taj Bradley, the most popular pitcher, and a terrible offense, and that's why it's working out the way that it is. But I like getting a little bit of Tampa because of the game environment. I obviously have talked about Washington and Philly. Philly is not going overlooked. Washington, I think, is a little bit, but both of these teams in the Cincinnati Great American Small Park are just neglected. It seems like relative to some of these other stacks, would much rather take an aggressive stance on them than the Angels. We are pretty aligned with that as well, and definitely want to take them over, any kind of Toronto business going on.
Are there any really contrarian offenses you like? And I mean, I'm talking about the teams who are sub 5% owned now, which it encompasses a good amount of teams. You know, the Rangers, the Nationals are sub 5% owned. I know you've mentioned liking that game environment. You got the Royals 4% owned. Anything else that you are looking at that you like sub 5% owned as a stack?
I mean, where did Tampa Bay end up landing when it's all said and done? I was just looking at
so Tampa Bay is currently 3.8% owned as a team against Ryan Feldner.
Obsessed. I'm way over the field.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. What do I have of Tampa? I'm about even with the field on the Rays. I don't have any like real significant stand there. With there is a part of this that maybe the market is missing out on. Do you know for George Steinbrenner Field, which I believe is what it's called, at least it was at one point. I used to go to the Yankee spring training games there as a kid. That is where the Royals are playing now, with Tropicana Field kind of falling apart. Is that going to profile to be more of a hitter-friendly ballpark there?
Yeah, it is. It's going to look a lot more hitter-friendly, I think, when it's all said and done. The main thing is that you're going to get heat that comes in. It's going to be 90 and humid very, very shortly, like 95 and humid very, very shortly. They are going to be playing baseball in June in a phenomenal spot. As far as the dimensions go, it's hard to take all of the AAA data and just kind of, sorry, not AAA, but spring training data and plug and play it, because it's going to be a 15 degree difference in game environments here very, very shortly. So it's not even the dimensions as much, which are, pretty neutral, but it is definitely going to be the weather that is going to have the biggest factor, and why I do think it's going to play up throughout the season.
Yeah.
So it's the exact same dimensions as Yankee Field. No, it's a little bit bigger from my understanding, but maybe I was mistold. But
there's a lot of comments in our Discord channel now where people are saying, "Hey, should they be boosting Tampa? Is that something they should potentially be doing?" I mean, it depends. Like if you have none of them, I think that's a mistake. So for me, where I'm actually getting the most of Tampa, and like I said, I've got some of them as a 5-man stack, about aligned with the field. Where I am really getting to this team a little bit more though is as one-offs and as a secondary stack, just because at their price points, like you look here, we have them as the 3rd best value stack on the entire slate. The only teams that are better has more to do with them being incredibly cheap as opposed to them being projected for any kind of success, where we got Miami extremely cheap, the White Sox extremely cheap. If I'm going to roster a team to save salary with, that's where Tampa Bay makes the most sense to me.
Correct. That perfectly said.
You know where I probably would get to a lot of them today is if we had like actual stud pitchers that were also expensive. Like if Taj Bradley was north of 10K today, if we had actual ace caliber starting pitchers that were really expensive to pay up for.
We do, but they're capped at 75 pitches. That's the other problem. It's like, we have the best potential pitcher in baseball, but he's not going far enough. And you need guys who have upside. And that's where we're kind of running into like, where the rubber meets the road. It's like you really need to find a reason to go to value stacks on this slate specifically. I'm just rotating through Robbie Ray, Bailey Ober, Jacob deGrom only 17%, Tanner Bybee 17%, Andrew Heaney 16%. Like I'm just so spread out amongst all these pitchers because I think it's going to be really hard to identify which one of these goobers finds upside. I'm hoping that the leverage I'm getting with the stacks and the spread out, like I'm still 70% Taj Bradley, so that's not going anywhere no matter what. But like the SB2 and then the leverage that I'm getting with these stacks, that's really what I'm kind of like hanging my hat on for today.
Anything else you want to talk about as far as stacks go? Anything that's different to you on FanDuel as opposed to DraftKings? If not, we'll do some dong picks before we head on over to Playback.
Yeah, let's well, I guess on FanDuel, obviously you're going to get a different pricing structure, can only play up to 4 bats. I would really behoove you to stack up Great American Small Park, stack up Washington, Philly. I would have some definite FanDuel lineups where it's just 4-4 of those 2 spots, because if you do get like a steroid type situation where the ball's just flying out of there in either spot, I think they're by far the most likely places that just have tons and tons of home runs. So I would want to find my way onto some of those 4-4 stacks. I'm not playing FanDuel today, but that would definitely be my plan of attack.
All right, guys, if you haven't done it yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you do want to be betting with us this year, don't forget to check out Portfolio EV, 7-day free trial, so no risk to you at all. Try out the tools if you like them, which I think you will. You'll stick around. If not, just cancel. No big deal. Won't be charged any money or anything like that. And we do have new baseball markets coming to the tools in short order, and definitely something to be on the lookout for as well. But before Eric and I head on over to Playback and start watching the games with you guys, and I'll make sure to drop that link into chat as well so that you guys have it. Eric, who is the dong pick today? Who are you picking to go yard?
I'll leave the Cincinnati Reds to you because you beat the drum for them a little bit more, them and San Francisco. I'll go to Washington. I really like Luis Garcia. They're 3-hole, 3.2K on DraftKings today. I am playing a lot of him. You have Josh Bell at 3.1K as well here, but Luis Garcia, the pop against righties is a real thing. We're going to go with him.
Also, don't forget, if you guys are listening in the chat and you want to give your home run picks, throw them into the YouTube chat because I'm going to be reading off some of your guys' picks as well before we head on out of here. Let's see. Who is it that I have the most exposure to overall as a hitter? That also isn't all that. Ooh, all right. So there's a lot of different directions I could go. I know which game it is that I'm going to be targeting. I don't want to be a total, I could just go Ellie De La Cruz and be a loser about it. Don't want to do that. Don't want to do that. I'll go with Matt Chapman. Matt Chapman actually pulling single-digit ownership. He's my most roster hitter on the entire slate, Eric. I have 30% of Matt Chapman. So, my hitter exposure is generally kind of smooth. It's very rare there's a situation like in NBA where I'd have like 90% of a hitter, but I do have 30% of Matt Chapman at single-digit ownership. So I think I would be remiss if I did not give him out as my home run pick because number one, I think he's fairly likely to hit a home run. But then number two, I think he's a great DFS player and it'd serve me well if he does go yard. So Matt Chapman, that is going to be my dong pick. Let's see what we have from you guys in chat here. We've got Van Dam NYC is going with Cody Bellinger and Aaron Judge. UFC betting boss, he's going with Aaron Judge. Pierre, who did you see what Vinny Pasquantino's positionality is on DraftKings today?
No, I didn't. What fuckery did they pull?
I'll let you guess. What position do you think he is?
So not first base. That is obviously not the case. Catcher would be very, very stupid. So that would be the dumbest of all, but I don't think they would be that stupid. Let's go shortstop because that just sounds stupid.
How about second and third base?
What
Dual
the hell?
Algebra.
Two positions he's never played, probably since Little League Baseball. That's great, guys. Awesome job.
Somebody, when I saw Pasquantino given out, I was going through my exposures and I was like, why do I not have any of him at all at first base? And then I realized it's because he is a second and third baseman for some sort of reason. So anyway, Pierre's got Vinny Pasquantino. We've got Brandon Baker going with Alec Baum, Brandon Lau from Envious, Anthony Santander from AJP. We've got Larnack from Chief U, Tyler O'Neill from Buccaneer. Tyler O'Neill could homer all the time, but with that said, he is the king of homering on opening day, apparently 6 years in a row or something like that.
So dumb.
Damon Langdon, he's going with Paul Goldschmidt. Rafael Devers, we got a very specific prediction from Tizzle Maine. He's got Rafael Devers going 1 for 5 with 4 strikeouts and 1 home run. We got Wood from OB1. We've got Arenado from Modub T. Brandon Lau as well from Ricardo Nelson. Let's see. Nick Castellanos from Marvin H. Ryan McMahon from Mike D. 2 home runs being called by Max Video from Nick Castellanos. Jake Swales going with Colton Cowser for a leadoff home run. We've got G. Joyner going Nick Castellanos, and then Bean Dude as well going with Alec Boehm. So guys, thank you very much for watching. If you have not done yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, but also we're not going to be ending here. Eric and I heading on over to Playback, which you guys can get to by clicking on that link I just dropped into the YouTube chat. Come join Eric and I over on Playback. We're going to have the games on screen so you can watch the games alongside with us. But then also any additional questions you guys have about the later slates, we could go over that. If you guys are looking for some bets, we could find some bets we like. So see you guys over in Playback. Good luck.